Go ahead and grab a seat, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Kids who just missed your classes, you can head right back over there. All right. A little bit of a warning here before I begin. I'm going to read more than I normally do. I'm going to do that for two reasons. The first is this: I have a lot of ground to cover, and when I have a lot of ground to cover, I have a tendency to get sort of sidetracked and go on tangents, and reading will keep me from going on as many tangents. The second reason is this: I tend to read just a little bit faster than I will talk about a particular topic, and that will keep us within a reasonable time frame. I don't want to keep you here through lunch plans. That would be terrible. I'm really sorry if I do that. Very excited for our topic today, excited for this series, excited to be here with you today. We're going to be putting some things on the screen as we go along. Like I said, I'm going to move fast. And so if you're like the type to take a note, take a note. If you're the type to take a photo of the screen, take a photo of the screen. That's completely fine. It's not like weird to pull your phone out and take a snapshot of the screen. That's no big deal. The Center for Preventative Action keeps a map of the world updated with human conflicts, and they call this map the Global Conflict Tracker. At present, there are 27 human conflicts taking place around the world. This is a screen grab of this map. You'll see that there are not very many taking place on our half of the world, sort of like on our side of the world, if you will. But you move over into Asia and Africa, and you'll see a tremendous amount of conflict. There are only a couple of conflicts between North America and South America and Europe, but in Asia and Africa, there are 24 conflicts that are worth noting on this particular map, which of course don't show all the conflicts happening in the world. There's a particular criteria that they use to put these on these maps. And where there is conflict, all the places that you see here, there is a lack of peace, if we were to even quantify such a thing. And for the sake of simplicity throughout the morning, we will do just that, quantifying peace. There's a lack of peace in these places. When there is a lack of peace or a growth in conflict, oftentimes things become deadly, ongoing, and widespread. Meanwhile, here in Inglewood, on a smaller scale, or even in the average American city, crime is on the rise. You may have read this or heard about this. Maybe even you've experienced this yourself. Here's a scale, or a graph, rather, from citydata.com that shows the Inglewood crime rate in comparison to the U.S. national average. You'll see that Inglewood, on the whole, year over year, typically has a much higher crime rate than the U.S. You also notice this map, or this graph rather, only goes to 2019, and if you've been paying attention to the news and sort of some of the data that's coming in, you'll know that the past couple of years there's been a spike in crime nationwide, including here in the city of Inglewood. Conflict is growing. Crime is growing. Tension is growing. Difficulty, challenge, strife, these things are growing not just on large scales like in global wars, but also in our own lives. It's likely that in your personal life or your professional life, you've experienced an increase in conflict, an increase in tension, an increase in challenges, or an increase in frustrations. But when conflict is on the rise, whether it's in our personal life or whether it's globally, it is important that we recall and that we remember that we are not without hope. I think that sometimes we get bogged down alongside the rest of the world, but there is something unique about being the church, about being the followers of the way of Jesus, about being Christians, that gives us a tremendous amount of hope in a particular situation where we might find there to be a tremendous amount of conflict. In Proverbs 12:20, it says, "Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy." Romans 14:19 says, "So then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another." James 3:17, "But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering and without hypocrisy." The Bible, this book that we hold very dear, this book that we preach from and read from and study out of every single week as we gather together, is filled with direction for how we, the followers of the way of Jesus, are to make peace in the world around us. The world needs peacemakers. People who make peace. That's literally what that word means. People who make peace. People who generate or cultivate peace where there is a lack of peace. The world needs that. Our communities need that. Your lives desperately need that. And my goal today is to convince you to consider peacemaking as a spiritual practice worth taking up, worth considering, worth trying out or trying on for size. That's my hope and my goal today. I'd like to argue that it's valuable and much needed as a spiritual practice, as a rhythm in our life to continue to practice, to bring about peace in our lives and in our community. But there's a bit of a problem with this particular spiritual practice of peacemaking. If you read Calhoun's handbook, or if you read Dallas Willard, or you read Henry Nouwen, or you read Richard Foster, or some of these spiritual practice giants, you may not find peacemaking as a traditional spiritual practice. You may not find it there in the lists that they create. In fact, as I've searched, I haven't really found it in traditional Christian spiritual practices, but I have found it. The one place that I found it that's been practiced for long before I was born, and obviously much longer than I've even been considering this, is among the Navajo people. They refer to it as K. Another way to reframe this or to define this is kinship, or to choose responsibility for another person. In their case, within their clan or within their tribe. Now, I'm not doing justice at all to this concept. It's similar to the Hebrew word shalom in that it has layers, and it's very deep, and it's gone on for a very long time, so I'm not doing justice to it. But my hope is to put it on your radar as something to look into at another time. But in traditional Christian circles, I haven't heard of peacemaking named quite that way, utilized in quite that way. But I want to use that term, peacemaking, as a spiritual practice for you for two reasons. The first is this. I would like for you to feel empowered to identify spiritual practices in your life that are actually meaningful to your particular stage and season in life. I want you to feel empowered to not feel as though you've got to borrow other people's spiritual practices, but rather to consider what are the ways that genuinely help you draw closer to God? What are the ways that genuinely help you grow in your spiritual health, and to name them the things that you want to name them? And there's some sort of voice in the back of my head as I was preparing for this, and I can't tell if it's like my evangelical upbringing or my reformed upbringing. I can't remember. Sometimes those voices sound a lot alike. But one of them is telling me, you shouldn't do that. You should be very careful. That's a slippery slope to sort of tailor making your own faith and therefore participating in some sort of therapeutic moral deism. And that is not, I think, a real risk. So I want you to reject the same voice that I'm rejecting and call your spiritual disciplines, call your spiritual practices the things that you want to call them, the things that are meaningful to you. Second reason why I want to use that term is because peacemaking is a term that Jesus himself uses in his preamble to the most famous sermon that is ever delivered. The Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 begins with a list of characteristics called the Beatitudes. And in it he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." They will become heirs and heiresses of the throne. They will become like God's children, inheriting all that God is giving to them. He will be like their father. They will be like his children. Blessed are the peacemakers. Not to mention the fact that peacemaking is a great name because it tells you exactly what it is. Like I said earlier, it's somebody who cultivates or creates peace where there is a lack of peace. I believe that it is a valuable and extremely important spiritual practice for us to consider. I would argue that Christians are uniquely positioned to practice or to create peace. That doesn't mean that we're the only ones doing it or that we can do it better than anyone else. I just think that we're uniquely positioned to, because all throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, from the law to the prophets to the retelling of the law, to the minor prophets and the major prophets, the stories and the history, the words of Jesus, the early church, peacemaking is something that finds its way into all of the language that we read in the Bible. It is everywhere when you start to look for it. And so if you call yourself a Christian, or if right now you're having a hard time with that term and you are like Christian adjacent and you've found another term for that, that's fine. Consider this: peacemaking could be a spiritual practice for you, a rhythm that you build into your life that of course impacts and affects the people around you, but is also a way for you to grow closer to God, to experience spiritual health and following the way of Jesus. I left a lot on the cutting room floor in this teaching. And there are a lot of things that I'm going to say that you're like, but he could have said that too. Trust me, okay? There's a lot more that I could have said, and I realize that, okay? But I'm going to talk very, very quickly about 4 different forms of peacemaking that I'd like to invite you into to consider. If none of these work for you, come and talk to me, because like I said, I have like 50 other suggestions that I would be happy to give to you, okay? The first one that we're going to talk about is one that shows up right in the very beginning words of the Bible, in the very first words in the book of Genesis, and I'm calling this environmental peacemaking. Starting in Genesis 1, verse 1, it says this: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, and calling the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning on the first day. And God said, 'Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water.' So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. And God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning on the second day." And you know the story probably by now. It goes on and on to tell more detail about how God brings order to this chaotic world. The heavens and the earth, the cosmos, the universe, our planet and its atmosphere was in a state of chaos, emptiness, nothing, a swirling soup, if you will, of all things, sort of disordered and without border and boundary. Eugene Peterson translates it this way: "Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness and inky blackness. God's spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss." This cosmic soup was disordered chaos. There was no up or down or in or out. There was no way to know what was what. But the Spirit of God hovered over it, and I choose to interpret that as the Spirit of God presided over it. And what follows in that story is God's Spirit creating order in what was otherwise absolute chaos. When order is created in a chaotic environment, the result is peace. This is peacemaking. This is environmental peacemaking. Notice that the story of the Spirit cultivating this kind of peace is happening in the natural physical world. To join God in what he is doing in the world around us is to join in this kind of peacemaking, bringing order to the chaos in the natural world. And as I read and learn more about our climate and how it's changing, how the planet is changing for the worse, it's becoming clearer and clearer that we are in environmental decline, natural decline, physical, tangible decline. Our climate and our environment and our natural world is becoming more chaotic. Order was brought to the chaos, and then chaos has continued to grow and grow and grow in our natural world. The first act of the Spirit is to bring order to that very chaos, and we have an opportunity, an invitation, in fact, to step into that and to practice environmental peacemaking. Now, not long ago, the city of Inglewood hired a woman named Meg England to oversee environmental sustainability here in our city. I reached out to Meg because I thought this would be really great. I can get the person who's responsible for that to give us some ideas for how we can step into sustainability efforts here in our city, and she hasn't gotten back to me yet. But when she does, I'm going to tell you exactly what she said. In the meantime, here are some suggestions, some practices. If this is scratching an itch and you're like, this is a spiritual practice I would love to jump into and to try out, here are some things you can do. First, you could join the Inglewood Sustainability Commission, okay? This is a commission that advises both city council and city staff on sustainability efforts and opportunities here in our city. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. But it also comes like it's a bit of a high price tag, meaning it takes some time from you. It's like kind of like some of you are on commissions with our city and you know that there's a commitment involved, okay? That doesn't feel like something that you can do right now. One of the opportunities or suggestions I would like to offer to you is that you can avoid driving a gasoline vehicle if at all possible. Now, I know you can't. I can't afford an electric vehicle, okay? Although I desperately would like to, I cannot. Some of you can, some of you can't. I get that. It's not what I'm asking. But you'll notice when you walk out there that there's a few bikes parked in the lobby out there. That is, depending on your outlook and your mentality on that practice, riding your bike somewhere, taking public transit, carpooling, whatever it is you're doing, walking somewhere, that is joining God in the natural and physical and environmental restitution of our world. Joining God in bringing order to the chaos that continues to grow in the world. It's environmental peacemaking. Consider that. Maybe build that into your weekly Sabbath practice on your way to church, on your way home from church, or on your way to whatever it is you do on your Sabbath. Maybe build that in. These kinds of spiritual practices and rhythms, when theology and rhythm is applied, become spiritual practices for us. These beautiful opportunities for us to draw closer to God and join God in the work that he is doing in the world around us. Moving on quickly to the next kind of peacemaking. Like I said, this is going to go rather quickly. This is the one that I crossed out, so I'm going to turn my page here. That's so sad. I really enjoyed that one. Okay, we'll talk about that one another time. You guys are all wondering what it is. The next thing that I want to talk about is something that I call classic peacemaking, or OG peacemaking, if you'd like. This is a kind of peacemaking that typically comes to mind immediately when we think about peace. Peace in terms of the absence of, or the lack of, or the overturning of violence. An opportunity for us as a community to step into a form of peacemaking that is simple and sort of the first way that we think of peace when we think about that word. It's the absence of violence, the absence of war. Countries are either in peacetime or in wartime. You might remember the slogan, peace in the Middle East. Peace is a counterweight to violence. Now, I think that this is a slightly narrow view of the idea of peace. I think peace extends well beyond the absence of violence, but it's not inaccurate. Absolutely, participating in nonviolent work, or work that overturns violence, is absolutely the work of peacemaking. And as violence is on the rise in our communities, the places that we shop, the places that we go to school, the places that we go to work, in people's homes, in people's neighborhoods, as violence is on the rise, there is no time like right now to begin to engage in a rhythm of peacemaking in our communities. The book of Isaiah chapter 2 contains the following passage. You may be familiar with this. It says this: "They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." Swords and spears literally transformed. They're weapons of that day, transformed into tools that would be used for agriculture. What if we, the church, the people of God, participated in such work, transforming tools or weapons, transforming communities, transforming the violence that we see in the world around us into something else, literally making, cultivating, creating, injecting peace into places of violence? Immediately prior to this verse, Isaiah is sort of setting up this like almost a vision of another world, like a world where Yahweh is overseeing and ruling over all things, and the character of God is found in all things. And so this verse isn't just cherry-picked out of there. There's a whole litany of verses that are really similar to this that talk about the reign and rule of God over the world. Most Christian scholars would say that this is actually the messianic reign. This is the reign of Christ over the world that is both already and not yet. And we get to experience a taste of it now, and we hope and long for the completion of it in the future. But in the meantime, we have the opportunity and invitation to step into rhythms of peacemaking, this classic kind of peacemaking wherein we overturn and counterweight, become a counterweight to the violence we see in the world. The main way that I'd like for us to consider sort of narrowing in on this and sort of defining how we would participate in this is related to school safety. I am still uniquely affected by the Uvalde shooting, as I know many of you are as well. I'm not sure exactly what it is about that particular school shooting that really wrecked me and made me rethink a lot of things, but there was something different about it, and it was right after that I found myself thinking and believing and feeling more so than ever before, never here, never in Inglewood. Of course, never anywhere, right? Like, I don't want that to happen anywhere, for there ever to be a situation where students are in danger. But we have taken responsibility for this parish. We have taken responsibility for this city, and she cannot experience or feel that kind of violence under our watch. We have something to do here. We have a call and an invitation to step into peacemaking. We can't simply stand by while guns are so easily acquired and violent extremism is simply too widespread to control. One benefit of being here in Inglewood and our schools here is that the buildings are relatively new, and therefore they are by many standards some of the safest in the nation. But there is a peace that can always continue to be more present. There is something that can continue to be reapplied over and over and over again, and that is the presence of safe adults in schools. When we participate in peacemaking as followers of the way of Jesus in our parish or wherever it is you call home, the way that we do that is by showing up as safe adults in an environment that may not always be safe for the students. I asked a member of the Inglewood School Board what we can do about this in our schools. I happen to know one very, very well. And she said this. She returned my email, unlike the other person. Here's what she said. She said, presence makes peace. Presence makes peace. Here's what she meant. Simply the presence of safe adults in our schools or wherever it is you'd like to apply this particular practice will continue to increase again if we were to quantify peace in that particular place. It's as simple as that. Whether it's volunteering in a classroom or contacting a school that's near you and asking, hey, is there some sort of like volunteer program to help keep that campus safe? You would be shocked how many schools have a program in place and they're just hoping for more volunteers to come and step in and participate. And some of you are doing the calculations and you're going like, I don't have students or I don't have kids at all or I don't have students in that school. It'd be really weird for me to try to like volunteer at that school. It wouldn't be at all. Julie and I started volunteering at Bishop and at Maddox before we had students enrolled there. There's a woman here in Inglewood. Her name is Mary. She's been volunteering every single week at Bishop Elementary School because she believes wholeheartedly exactly what I'm saying, that a safe adult in a school, on a school campus, will bring peace to that place. She has no children, and yet she continues to show up every single week to bring health and peace and safety to that particular campus. She's on the parent council now. She doesn't have children. She's on the parent council because she's such a safe and trusted adult, and she is able to be there with the students, but also out there on the property, continuing to show the students and the community what safety looks like. What about you? Is there a school nearby that you could call? Maybe it's like once in a semester that you stop by and you just try to offer some sort of peaceful presence in that community. I don't know where it is for you or where it starts for you or exactly what it looks like for you. What would it look like for you to bring more peace, to be a peacemaker in our community? Again, participating in peacemaking with regularity and God-given intentionality is a valid spiritual practice that is at your disposal for spiritual growth. On to the next. This one, economic peacemaking. There's been a lot of talk about this in recent days, and I, for one, have been a little bit perplexed about the way that Christians have sort of engaged this or sort of disengaged with this idea, when in reality, economic peacemaking was something that God sort of originated. God kind of had the idea to begin with and has been sort of prodding us as his people to continue to participate in, according to the law, the Torah, okay, the law of God's people, both in its original telling and its retelling and its interpretation, asks for or even commands, if you will, that the 50th year be a mega Sabbath. The 50th year of God's people is a time where you let your crops lay fallow. You don't farm or do any of the agricultural work that you would normally. You don't really work. You spend time with family. You allow things to rest. The 50th year of every generation is to be a Sabbath unto the Lord. It is referred to as the year of Jubilee. Perhaps the best part. In this 50th year, all debts were forgiven. There was no debt. Debt was wiped out and washed away, and the 51st year, everybody started over again. And maybe people took out loans the first day of the 51st year. I have no idea how they made that work, but there was no debt. It was wiped out. This was God's idea all along, and it is the kind of thing that continues to be unique to both the Jewish people and the Christian people, that this is baked into our history, baked into our story, and baked into our tradition, that on a regular basis there was a canceling of debt. And yet, recently, for whatever reason, because of a canceling of student debt, there is a lot of frustration. And I understand that maybe that is because it is the government that is doing it. And I am not here to say whether or not the government should or should not cancel debt of any kind. But what I am here to say, that it is absolutely quintessential and it is absolutely unique to our culture and our community that we would participate in debt cancellation, that we would participate in freeing and liberating people from the debts that they've experienced. Americans are currently strapped with $1.75 trillion of student debt, $195 billion in medical debt, and $887 billion in credit card debt. And those are just a few versions of debt that Americans alone are strapped with. Is some of that debt due to poor financial decisions? Probably. Do you think that that was taken into account when God gave the year of Jubilee to his people? Probably not. And what if we participated in the liberation of each other, liberating each other from being weighed down and held back by debt? We say every week that we want to be generous because our Father is generous, and that we want to show the world what he is like. Well, God is unconditionally generous. God has given things to us that we do not deserve and that we could never repay. He has canceled debts for us left and right, and canceling debt would be one of the best ways for us to show the world what God is like, and to make and to cultivate, to inject and to bring about peace in the lives of other people. Debt is chaos. It's a burden. It's oppressive. It's like a disease, and it is a violence in some cases. And some of you know what I'm talking about because you have debt, and you know how heavy it can feel. And you know how it feels like imprisonment. The people of God are a liberating people. We are a light burden people. We are a generous people. What if our generosity was to bring about the jubilation of another person by canceling or freeing them from debt? Some practices you can consider. The first one would be paying down debt for friends and family. My guess is that there are people in your life that you are very close with, and I don't know that they've actually seen your bank statement or your debt statements, your credit card bills, the money, your income, what you make or what you owe. The people that we are closest with oftentimes don't have a window into that very particular part of our lives. What if you developed a relationship? Ask someone today, could we enter into a reciprocal relationship where you show me a lot of your financial information and I show you a lot of mine because I trust you and I believe that you've got my back? Friend, a family member, someone from your table group, maybe your entire table group, I have no idea. We tend to know so much about each other's lives except for about our money, except for about the way that we spend or borrow or save or whatever it is we do with our money. And as you're getting to know this part of another person's life, what if you're noticing somebody else is in debt, what if you were to pay that off or to help with that as best you can? Another way to do this, if you'd like to do this more anonymously, is there's a really interesting website called ripmedicaldebt.org, and they are a nonprofit that are actively paying down people's medical debt. Usually always people who are living at or below the poverty line. And what happens is people like you and me, regular people like you and me, make a contribution to that nonprofit, and then they take that money and they buy debt from hospitals at a tremendous discount. And then they pay off as much, so you get more bang for your buck because every dollar that you give, you're paying off like $10 worth of debt or whatever it is, something like that. And that person, once their medical debt is paid down, they get a letter in the mail that says you don't owe anything anymore. That's it. There's no name attached to it. There's no nobody's back gets patted. It's just a beautiful way to liberate and to free somebody from something that was holding them down. Can you imagine living that kind of life where we're thinking about how are we liberating other people? How are we creating peace in a world that feels like chaos, in a world that feels strapped with violence, in this particular case, debt? Lastly, and I'm going to go through this one really quickly, primarily because there's something you can grab on the way out that relates to this. Relational peacemaking. For many of you, some of these things feel like way too big and like way too other kind of than what you're just like, all you can think about is this one relationship that you have right now that is broken or in pain. All you can think about is like a friendship or a marriage or a relationship with a parent or something like that that feels strained and feels broken and it needs help and it needs work. And I want to give voice to that. I want to validate that and recognize that that is a legitimate form of difficulty and pain and chaos in your life. And there are ways for you to work your way through that, but all peacemaking requires initiation. It requires somebody taking the initiative to step in and say, I would like to make peace in this chaotic scenario. And it may be you. Maybe you stepping into that relationship and saying, I'm going to follow the way of Jesus. I'm going to practice the character of God by stepping into this difficult, chaotic situation and by bringing about peace. Here are some practices to consider. First, there's a worksheet in the back. I don't know if to call it a worksheet, but it's like a thing. The front and back. The front is just sort of defining terms. This is how relationships are reconciled and reinstated, renewed, if you will. And the backside is a practical kind of guide for how to do this. Some of us here in this room have actually gone through this process before. It's not perfect. It's not a guarantee. It's not a silver bullet, okay? It doesn't fix everything. But it's a start. It's a step. there's a relationship that you feel is strained or broken, grab one of those on the way out. Or grab it just because you're curious about it. Doesn't matter. Take as many as you want. Another way you could kind of practice this sort of peacemaking is just take time to pray each week through your list of people. Who are your top 10 people that you spend time with or that you think about? And ask God, is there anybody who I have a strained relationship with that maybe I need to step in and create some repair or create some peace in that relationship? You'll be surprised what comes to your mind. You might be surprised on who you might reach out to and say, hey, you came to mind in my time in prayer, and I feel like I'd like to reach out to you and see if we can make peace. You might be surprised by how that turns out. Peacemaking as a spiritual practice will result in the canceling of chaos. It is the work of the Spirit that we are blessed to join. It is a wonderful invitation that isn't all about us, but really it's about the world around us. And as Maggie has mentioned several times in this series, we hope that you'll find spiritual practices throughout this series that become rhythms in your life that do draw you toward God and draw you towards others and draw you out to your community. In practicing peacemaking, we become more like children of God, dependent on Him, admiring Him, and learning from Him as a perfect Father. Peacemaking always requires initiative, and it always requires innovation. These are things that we can take to the bank because they will have outcomes that are beneficial to both ourselves and to the people around us. You might be wondering why I'm not closing with here's all these practical church programs that you can jump into and be a part of. You may have also noticed that we don't have a lot of church programs, and there's a reason for that. We'd really like to maintain a really simple approach to church. We don't want to get bogged down in all these programs we have to manage, and then we kind of miss the point of being the people of God. But secondarily, there are so many incredible ways that the Spirit of God is working out in our community. For us to reinvent the wheel would be to be missing out on those opportunities. I'd rather send you out to our schools, send you out to our city government, send you out to our community, and ask you to consider how can you participate in the work of God there to make peace, to bring about peace in a world that feels overwhelmed with chaos. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, as I consider spiritual practices and as we are in this series, I feel as though there are a million places that we could go, and sometimes we feel paralyzed by all of the options that we have before us. So God, I pray that right now, in this very moment, that we would feel a clear call in a singular direction. That each individual person here would not feel overwhelmed by the options, whether it's options we've presented or other options they know, but rather they would feel a tug on their heart to move in a particular direction, and that you would give us motivation and fervor to plow forward in that. We love you. We pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.